could you start by giving us a definition of metacognition, what it is, and what are its main functions?
Sure. So metacognition literally means cognition about cognition, or thinking about thinking. So it's this reflective capacity that we have to think about how our minds are working. And perhaps the best way to introduce it is with a couple of concrete examples. So an example of metacognition about memory or learning would be, for instance, if you're planning to go to the shops and you start to accumulate a list in your head, and then you think to yourself, hang on a minute, I'm not going to be able to remember this. I better write it down. So that's a judgment about your own memory capacity. You're thinking to yourself, okay, it's not going to be good enough to hold all this list in mind. So I then outsource it to the external world. I write it down on paper or on my phone or whatever. So immediately we see that functional connection where having good metacognition is then good for leveraging external resources to help us get things done. Another example in a completely different domain might be when we think to ourselves, our vision or other aspects of our cognitive function are failing, and that might prompt us to go and seek help. So if you think your vision is failing, that might prompt you to go and get a new pair of glasses or something, or get it checked in some way. And so that's a judgment, again, not about the external world. We don't think the external world is suddenly become blurry. We think to ourselves, hang on, my perceptual system's not functioning the way it should be. And so that's, again, a judgment about how our own minds and brains are working. And we think this notion of explicit self-awareness, this being able to build a model of how we ourselves are functioning, is something that is uniquely human, at least in its most rarefied forms. And we think it supercharges many different aspects of our lives, and I'm sure we'll get into some of these.
I'm passionate about this idea of self-awareness from a leadership perspective, particularly because, at least from an emotional intelligence point of view, it's something that can be developed and improved over time. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how metacognition can be thought of as an attribute that can be developed?
Yes, sure. So metacognition is something that we think is malleable. It's not set in stone. And one way we can investigate this is by, first of all, measuring people's metacognitive acuity in the lab. And the way we do this is by asking them to carry out simple tasks where they rate how confident they are at performing that task. And then we analyze the match between confidence and performance. And so the intuition is that if you have high confidence when you're right and lower confidence when you're wrong, that's a sign of having good metacognition. And what we found, and others have found this as well, that when you ask people to practice those kind of tasks and now give people feedback, not only on their performance, but also on how accurate their confidence is. So in a sense, try and improve their calibration of their confidence estimates. Then this ends up over time, and we've done these experiments over multiple days, over a period of a couple of weeks. Over time, people become better and better at realizing when they've made errors and noticing when they've got the answer right. And what's super interesting about one of the experiments we ran on this is that that training effect then transfers to a completely untrained task. So it seems that we're, in a sense, able to boost this more abstract level of metacognition. It's not that we're just boosting your metacognition on this one single task. It seems like we're having an effect more broadly in improving your self-awareness about multiple things you could be doing. Now, we're just scratched the surface on this. We've got a lot more research to do to see what benefits that, if any, might have for people's daily lives and how it might impact on well-being and so on. These are all things we're interested in. But I think what we're excited by is it's almost like a proof of concept that this well-defined capacity to think about and reflect on our performance can be trained.
The scope of what you're doing is really huge. I mean, you seem to be in all sorts of different applications of this, which is very exciting. And I also read about your work in thinking about artificial intelligence and how this, this understanding of knowing when we don't know helps, us to maybe think about how we could get AI to doubt itself. You gave a really interesting example. I love this, which is kind of like a self-driving car glowing in different colors depending on its confidence on the road. I thought that's hilarious. You kind of sort of, I can imagine, your car starts turning red, meaning that it doesn't really know where it's going, or it's not really sure whether it's safe. Grab the wheel.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit how you're thinking about metacognitions, the breakthroughs you're making, and how that might inform artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so we do just as your the example that you referred to there of the self-driving car. We think that one thing, and this is not something that I'm bringing to the table, machine learning and AI researchers have known this for many years, that the systems, the neural network systems that they are building often struggle with out of distribution data. So when they see things that they haven't been trained on before, they're often overconfident about the guesses they make in those situations, whereas a human would go, hang on, I just don't know really what I'm doing here, so I probably should slow down if I'm driving, for instance, and figure it out. And so what I was suggesting in that FT piece was perhaps you could imagine a future where if we can somehow build the capacity for implicit tracking of confidence and uncertainty in AI systems as a routine aspect of building those systems, and then have those signals be broadcast to the world, then would that have benefits not only for the AI itself, so it could effectively recognize when it's in a situation where it didn't know what it was doing, but also benefits for trust of human AI teams. So as you were saying, if I think, hang on, my kind of robot collaborator here doesn't really know what they're doing, so I should take over. That I think would provide a much smoother interaction in human machine teams. And this is something we're actively working on. So I'm collaborating with roboticists at the Oxford Robotics Institute on a new UKRI program grant, which is seeking to, the broader goal of the grant is to build more autonomous robots. And one component of that is to think about ways of building metacognition into the robots. And there's been some, really interesting developments on how you can track uncertainty and confidence in neural nets, for instance. But so far, at least, there hasn't been this notion of metacognition about what the system's doing as a whole. So you might have the ability to track confidence about what the camera is seeing, for instance. But this idea of a kind of more global confidence signal that humans seem to do effortlessly, that hasn't really been brought in to the robotics world. And that's something we're actively working on.